And we're live. Check it out today. I'm going to do, while I'm waiting for everyone to come, pop up, and do a little double-fisted drinking. Sip of coffee. Very hot. And sip of water. Hi, everybody. So, hello, and welcome to yet another installment of Geek. Wow. Woo. Geek Speaks Greek. Hi, I am George O'Connor. I am your geek, clearly speaking English. The Greek in reference to which I'm speaking is Greek mythology. If you've never seen the show before, this is a 3 times a week live cast wherein I discuss various personages from Greek mythology, be they goddess, god, hero, or monster. I do a little bit of drawing. I talk about how I've used them in my graphic novel series Olympians, or in some instances, how I haven't used them in my graphic novel Olympians series. Let's see. I want to point out first, while I'm waiting for people to join, I got a haircut. Check it out. Girlfriend did a really good job. I have a weird lumpy head and I have crazy curly hair. There's maybe like 2 people in the entire planet who know how to cut my hair successfully. There's one is Lisa LeBou, my hairdresser for many years now. And now I guess my girlfriend can kind of do a pretty sweet job. Save the day. I had a great weekend, I gotta say. Everyone's been kind of sequestered. I live in New York City, where it's been kind of the epicenter for like this country where stuff's been going on. And it's been pretty rough, but we had 2 beautiful days in a row this weekend. And while maintaining careful quarantine, like distancing and such, got to see some friends of mine I haven't seen. On Saturday, hung out with my good friend. I probably shouldn't say their names, right? Hung out with one of my good friends. And then on Sunday, it was another one of my best friend's birthdays. And a bunch of us went there and we like kind of surprised him at his house and yelled stuff from the window, hung out in the front porch. It was delightful. So I'm in a really good mood. I'm feeling great, even though it's kind of cloudy today. I also want to report, because now I've taken this big step where things finally are going to feel like they're under control in New York. Some of you, a while ago in some instances, have purchased things off of my Olympian store, my website. And I am happy to say I finally shipped some stuff out. So if you ordered something a while ago, thank you for being so patient. And it should be getting to you soon. If you still don't see anything, please contact me. Oh, I don't have my things. Oh, I don't have my little signs I hold up. I redid everything here. But write to me at my email, georgeoconnorbooks@gmail.com. So if you've... If you've never joined me before, one of the great things about the show is you, the listeners, spend a lot of time drawing your own beautiful art and sending it in. So I like to start off each episode sharing some of the artwork that's been sent to me. So right up front, this is by Ilya, who has sent us stuff before. A really terrific young artist. Look at this beautiful Selene she did. So on Friday, last week was kind of like local celestial body themed gods and goddesses. On Monday we did Mother Earth, Grandmother Earth, Gaia herself. On Wednesday we did Helios, the sun, and then on Friday we did the sun's sister, Selene or Selena, I couldn't decide. Every time I said it differently, basically. And this is a beautiful drawing. The color adds so much to it. I love the matching horns. I said that I was talking about how there was 2 different versions, that she could be riding either a horse or an ox. I kind of like, even though I drew her first in the series on a horse, I prefer the ox version. Seems Ilya does too. So again, Ilya, beautiful job. Let's see what else we have here. This one is from Eleanor. What happened? It went away. Here is a drawing, another one of Selene. I'm really enjoying the colors. I love the contrast of the bright yellow moon. It's like a harvest moon or something. Although harvest moon's only when it's full moon, right? But this bright yellow moon, and then like the cool nighttime colors of Selene. Great job. Like, it's really been exciting to see how people are getting better and better. Like, just through the practice. It's amazing how it works that way. You draw every day, or almost every day, and you start getting really better, a lot better. So, this is from, we have the team, this is from Joseph. There's some pretty funny sibling stuff going there. There's Helios, the sun, going by in the sky, and he's going, "Hi, sis!" And there's, oh man, there's an interesting thing going on. I just realized Selene has the head of the ox, and the ox has the head of Selene, and she's going, "What?" So maybe, I don't know if Joseph is just being silly, or maybe Helios is being silly and played a joke there. And then what else do we have? And this one, oh, this is from Juliet, Joseph's sister. Another great sleeve. Look at this. Look at that. I mean, wow. That, I talk about this before. One of the things you talk about when you're an artist is engaging the whole piece of paper. Like, you really engage the whole piece of paper. Like, every minute, every inch of this is covered in the composition. This is such a great drawing. Juliet, you're getting really, really good. Let's see who else we have from today. Here are, okay, so that we just said that was just one brother-sister duo. Here is another brother-sister duo. This is from Nora and Drake. If I recognize the styles, I think this is Drake's. This is a Selene. Oh, and actually, it looks like Drake went and did the Chariot. Because I talked about how I actually dropped out the Chariot, but like myths do mention a Chariot, so I think that he went and did. So way to go. And then also great color. I like the way you have like the kind of yellow underneath the blue. It actually looks like the way the moon is. Like they're kind of vacillates between the two colors. And then here is from Drake's sister, Nora. Look at this one. This is beautiful. And also, I should have mentioned this before. It's the other one. She has the flowing robes coming off her, which is something that I mentioned. Like a lot of the myths mentioned, they mentioned her horns, which is like cool, and then she also has like flowing garments. She doesn't run around naked like her brother Helios. Helios, man, you gotta put on some pants, right? I mean, he's on fire. I guess he doesn't need to. All right, so now we all know Yehi, who is from Korea. She has been sending us some amazing artwork. Here she drew an Amphitrite. Going back a bit, that's like several weeks back we did this. Kind of a goddess who, although did appear briefly in one panel of like, not even Poseidon, I forget which book it was. Oh, Hermes, I think. We kind of like designed her further, like live in the can. Like, I love the hair. Somebody had written, I forget who, with the idea that her hair is probably red because deep sea life is often red because that reads as black underwater. So we have kind of like black and red, and there's the crabs. That was one of her attributes. She had crabs in her hair, which is like, ew, comb your hair. This one, a sheep to a panther. So, like, I just think this is a beautiful piece. And, this, in case you don't, like, this is a reference to Dionysus. You could see, because of the different colored eyes. My version of Dionysus, he has, they would call that heterochromative eyes, where one of his eyes is purple, one of his eyes is green. That's not a mythological precedent. That's my own spin on it, but there's a couple reasons for it. One thing, it kind of makes him look a little crazy. He's the god of craziness. It's also to show the two different colors of grapes. This is a beautiful piece. And I think she's drawing a connection between the madness that Dionysus is often thought to create and the madness that is often associated with the moon. We talked about that a bit in the Selene episode. Still haven't done Dionysus. I feel like at this point, that's the biggest omission of people that I haven't covered. Again, this will be something I post. I'm just going to show you really quickly. Beautiful comic. Look at the attention. I mean, gosh. Yehi, you're astounding. Also, Yehi was like, I mean, just the amount of stuff, I could do like an all Yehi blog and just that would be it. And then this one's very interesting. This one is from Moirae, and Moirae went and drew a dryad, who is not something that we've actually discussed yet. A dryad is like a wood spirit, like associated with like trees and things. Beautiful drawing. I love this. This is such a great drawing. I also really I love it when somebody takes it upon themselves to do like a mythological creature that we haven't even touched yet. Like the other day, Megan did Endymion, and like I had never drawn Endymion. We were talking about Endymion that day, and I love that. I love to see your own takes on things. I also love when people do their own takes that look nothing like mine, because you know what? These gods have been around for a long time, and I'm not the first person to try to draw pictures of them. And you might look at some of my drawings and be like, well, I don't really agree with that one. It doesn't necessarily view like with my version. Draw your own. That's awesome. Everybody loves to see that stuff. Speaking of people's ideas who maybe don't match up, today, okay, let me officially announce, this week is going to be called, well, I can't decide because I'm a fan of alliteration, if it's going to be called Gaggles of Goddesses or Groups of Goddesses. Probably groups, because gaggles is for geese, and, we don't want to say. But there are many groupings in ancient Greek religion of, groups of goddesses. Sometimes it's a trio. Today we're talking about 2 trios, kind of one. I don't know. We're gonna get into this. This is gonna be a heavy episode, just to warn you. I'm gonna do some hardcore rambling. On Wednesday, we're gonna talk about a different trio of goddesses. Not one that could be easily conflated with the Fates and the Furies. We're going to be talking about the Charites, the handmaidens of Aphrodite. And then on Friday, we're going to be talking about a much bigger group of goddesses, the Muses. That one's going to be... There's so many muses to cover, I'm probably just going to be mentioning them and just rattling them off real quick. So that's going to be the theme for this week. I'll be posting stuff on my Instagram. But today, we're going to be tackling, like I said, it's two groups of goddesses who are often conflated. And this is something, it's a somewhat controversial conflation. It's a thing that, honestly, I myself conflated them. And conflate means to, like, kind of purposely kind of mix them together, identify them together. There's, for most of Greek mythology, they're two very separate groups of goddesses. And I think it's much more of a modern interpretation to kind of bring them together. And it's one that I'm guilty of doing in Olympians. And it's something I have my doubts about sometimes, I'll be honest. And I'm going to talk about that, why I decided to do this. We're going to be talking about, and you'll pardon me using the Anglicizations of their Latinized names, Latin names first, the Fates and the Furies. So, now, how best to do this? Because we're talking about two different groups. First off, I just broke one of my big cardinal rules. You know me, I'm the guy who's like, it's Heracles, not Hercules. I never refer to things by their Roman names first. Because this is it's Greek speaks geek, not, I don't know, loser loops Latin. I don't know. I couldn't come up with alliteration on the team, but and like I'm not a loser, am I? Oh. The Greek. Let's start first with the quote unquote Fates. The Greeks would have called them the Moirae, or perhaps the Moirae. The Romans called them either the Fates, which is again they may call them maybe like the Fata, or the Fatum, or the Parsei. They were, as their name hints, they were the goddesses of fate. There were three of them. I'm going to draw them real quick. And the ancient Greeks hit on a pretty brilliant metaphor for how to represent them. They are three goddesses who control fate. What is fate? It's like, the idea was like you were born a mortal, or whoever, maybe you're not immortal, and your whole life is out in front of you, right? But there's a path your life is going to take. Eventually you're going to die. You're going to do other things in between. And it was these goddesses who measured that out for you. First, that marker's too thin. I'm working on this new paper here. That one, remember I mentioned how I found some paper the other day? It really absorbs markers. I draw them, first of all I should mention, I draw them all as shrouded, youthful figures. There's different interpretations. A lot of times you'll see them in art as like kind of old ladies. That gets them confused with another group of trio of goddesses, kind of trio, more like witches, the Graeae. That's a whole other thing. I'll get to that later. The first of the Moirae, I don't know why she's smiling. They're normally pretty somber, is Klothos. There's her. I'm going to make her holding this spindle. Because Klothos, which you can see has the root for cloth, her name means the spinner. And she was the one who held the spindle that the thread of your life was measured out from. Okay? We've found this so far. We have one who's got, this is the thread of your life. Or this is the potential thread of your life, okay? Then, in the middle, identical, although if you look carefully at my artwork, and this is something that only I would notice, I draw them all very slightly different colors, so you can actually identify who they are, like the different colors of the robes, and even their skin tones are slightly different, their lips, things like that. In the middle is Lachesis, and Lachesis would take lengths of this string that is spun out by Klothos. And Lachesis was the one. There's her bare feet. Like most of my primordial gods or first generation Olympians, I draw them without sandals because I figure they predate shoes. They don't wear shoes. And why would they need it? Where does she go anyway? And she measures out the length of your life. And if you're lucky, she measures out a lot. And if you're unlucky, you don't. I mean, people complain about getting old all the time. I myself have done it occasionally. And I always say, you're lucky to get old, because not everybody gets that chance. Not everybody has lachesis measure out a full allotment of life. And lachesis means, I said allotment, the dispenser of lots, which means literally she's the one who measures out how long someone's life would be. And then finally, we have one other, again, identical, but she's identified. She's holding some big shears, or scissors, you can call them. I mean, I call them scissors. I don't know why I said shears. And her name is Atropos. Her job is when your life is over, she cuts that string of life in your life and you die. She's the final one who cuts out. Her name means cannot be turned, which means like you cannot stop her. She's death. Death is inevitable. And so there are these three goddesses, right, who control the fate. And they're fascinating characters. Now, I'm going to come back to them, because at the same time, I want to talk about the Furies. Now, I said, in most of Greek mythology, the Furies are actually considered different than the Fates. I've kind of brought them together. If you saw the little Instagram post I did advertising it today, there was a line from Hades where Persephone happens upon the Furies in the underworld. And she says, the Fates? Because she's seen these Fates before. And they actually have given her advice. They give her like this advice about her fate. And he goes, let's call them the Furies. And they're different aspects of the same goddess. I'm going to get to that later. Now, the Furies, again, I'm using a Roman name. The Greeks would have called them the Erinyes, or perhaps even sometimes the Eumenides, which you see that a lot in a more poetic way. But they were the goddesses of like vengeance, retribution. A lot of overlap there with the idea of a character we've covered previously, Nemesis, who was the goddess of retribution. And whereas Nemesis, it's a little hard because a lot of these gods have overlap, right? Nemesis was more almost like, even though she's like kind of scary, she's like a child of Nyx, Night, who is, a kind of scary deity. The idea of her was almost to establish order in a way. Whereas the Erinyes, even though they also have that same thing, they were more likely to be invoked in a curse. So maybe like the Erinyes are almost like on a more personal level. And you might, like, Nemesis, we kind of fell in the idea of talking about, like, hopefully Nemesis doesn't go after you unless you really deserve it. The Erinyes, somebody could curse you with them and you might find them after you. I'm kind of parsing out stuff here, which is, okay, it's ironic I said parse, because parse is the Fury, not the Roman name for the Moirae. But with the Erinyes, I don't know, it's kind of hard to establish exactly the difference between them and Nemesis, although they certainly appear a lot more. They seem to be much more common. They might even be an older concept. You see them a lot in older stories. There are not always depicted three of them. I should also mention, even with the Moirae, there's not always three. We see three in Hesiod, and I always say Hesiod before else. Homer only has one fate, and her name is it's Aisa, I think. And Homer has like a very different, like a lot of his genealogies and even names of gods are very different. The Erinyes, it's not always necessarily clear how many there are until really the Latin era. And this is funny. I couldn't actually... So, they have three names. Their names are Electo, Megara, and Tisiphone. But I can't find any source... Those names clearly sound Greek, but I can't find any source before a Latin version that actually names them. So, I feel like this is one of those instances, as the gods were around for longer and longer, they start, borrowing attributes from stuff. I feel like originally there wasn't necessarily just three Erinyes, and they weren't necessarily like named. They were just kind of Erinyes. They were like these living curses, so to speak. Not curses like when you say a bad word, curses like you put a curse on someone. But they get the names Electo, Megara, and Tisiphone later in the it's in the Aeneid, actually, the first time they appear, and then you see it, everything after that. Everybody refers to them that way. Their depictions are kind of all over the place. Sometimes they are depicted as looking like gorgons. Actually, it's a very common thing. Like kind of like old Medusas. Snakes in their hair. They might have snakes around their limbs. Sometimes they have whips literally made of snakes. And they're kind of scary and like spooky. Sometimes they're pictured with wings. And so when I drew them, because I wanted to combine them in a sense, or at least have them, if they're not the same beings, they're in a way reflections. And I'm going to get to this. This is my whole idea behind them. They're reflections of the fates, right? So I drew them very similar to this. Their design is basically the same thing. Young women, barefoot, wearing dark robes. But it's the posture I drew them in that kind of makes them different. And I also, in at least one or two scenes, I gave them glowing eyes. So I'm going to do that now. And here's another difference. When they're the Moirae, at best, they have a serene smile on their face. They're very placid. I draw them as very calm, detached, aloof. There's a lot of emotion on their face when I draw them as the Erinyes. They smile broadly, too broadly. You can see their back molars. Their teeth are just a little bit too sharp. They hunch over. They move in these serpentine ways. And that is as a reference to that scary version of them that I was talking about. You know, because their names, Electo, I don't actually know what they mean. Electo, Megara, and Tisiphone. I'm not going to determine who is who here, right? Just assume they've taken these aspects. Here's another one. There's one scene when you first meet them, actually, in Hades, my book Hades, where after they've given their bit of oracular advice to Persephone and the underworld, and they turn as one, and they smell something almost, and they fly off, and Hades says they're off to torment some fool who's been cursed by the Erinyes. And when they fly off, their forms kind of elongate into these like wing shapes, and they become these long robes, which I like that idea too. So like I kind of have the idea that they have the wings in there. Also, when you see them is it the first time? It's one of the times. I should read my own books more often. You actually see one of them, or I think all of them, they're kind of like crawling down a wall. So it's the same design, like Spider-Man, like head first. It's the same design, but just by moving them in different ways, the posture, they become much different. Because, truly, I'm going to hold this in my hand for a bit because I'm going to flip back and forth. These are gods to be respected and feared. They literally control your entire mortality, like the entire thread of your life. And it gets kind of weird to explain because then like, wait, isn't Thanos the god of death? And isn't Hades the god of the death? And how does Hermes fit into this? I'm not sure. There's a lot of ways to look at it. There's like shades of meaning. But then they're to be feared on a very different way. And what's also, these guys come after you and they cannot be turned away. Just like Atropos cannot be turned away. Interestingly, both sets of goddesses have implacability, meaning they cannot be turned away as part of their core attributes. Talking about the Moirae, they famously control fate. Now, I was talking so far about how it applies to mortals, how they measure out the span of your lifetime. Now, something I've emphasized over and over again on this series, Olympians cannot die, right? That's just a thing. They are without end. So if they were to measure out their string, the string would just be infinite. It would never end. But even the gods have to obey the fates, which is a super fascinating concept. We'll get to that. There's one big exception, and it's kind of key to them. And also, with the Erinyes, once they've been set on someone, you cannot turn them away. They are, like, it doesn't matter. Even if you have a god protecting you, they will come after you. So there's this, like, kind of, like, quality, like, even the other gods, the ostensibly greater gods, the Olympians, are unable to stop either of them in the completion of their duties. Okay. So I want to make sure I'm not forgetting anything before I go into talking about... Let me talk about their respective origins first before I go into my deliberate conflation of them. So there's at least two major parentages mentioned for the Moirae. And what's really weird is they're both in the same source by the same author. You know, Hesiod, who I always hold up as the guy who goeth all, he himself, in his Theogony, cannot agree who their parents are. In the beginning of the book, as he's describing the creation of the cosmos, they are stated to be the children of Nyx. You know, so it would make them sisters of Nemesis, of Erebus. No, not Erebus. Oh man, my brain's melting. Of Selene. No, Nyx. What's her name? Troublemaker. Eris. Like all these different gods, they are actually the sister of them. Like, that's cool. It's kind of primordial. Makes a lot of sense. They're really important. The gods, even the Olympians have to obey them. They should precede them in some way, right? Later on in the same theogony, he ends up saying that they are the children of Zeus and Themis. Themis is one of the Titans, which makes them half primordial, right? Like, so it's like Zeus and his own aunt, which is always one of those things like, except for, Olympians, not really, people. Themis was like the Titan. She was associated with the idea of like, almost like the sense of sacred, right? Divine law. So that kind of makes sense why they would have power over the gods, because she was the goddess whose importance was the power of the gods, right? And then Zeus, as their dad, is interesting, but then it puts them pretty late. Like, they have to come after Zeus, and Zeus is the last of the OG Olympians, and then like they're able to boss around all the Olympians and the Titans and everyone before them. It's kind of weird, right? So that's never sat with me super great. In the fact that it's in the same work by the same author, that Hesiod doesn't agree where they come from, I've always put that as like, so maybe I don't have to agree with those sources. Now, let's cut to the Erinyes. The Erinyes, there's a couple different versions of where they come from, too. And the version that is the totally cool boss metal version, the one I use, comes from, can you guess? Hesiod. So when the Titans overthrew Uranos, the sky, right? This is a scene in my book Zeus that I've probably redrawn at least 5 times because I think it's really cool. They hold Uranos steady, the 4 Titans, and then Kronos, the youngest, takes the sickle made of adamantine. He slices open the sky, and all his power is bled away. He's rendered impotent, and his blood hits the earth in these big, thick droplets, Uranos' blood. His blood hits the body of his wife, Gaia, also his creator. And wherever this blood touches, it gives birth to new life. And that's where the Gigantes come from, right? But it's also where the Erinyes come from. I'm like, that's cool. The goddesses of like retribution and vengeance are born from the blood of an act of not patricide, but somebody like slicing up their own father and overthrowing him. That makes total sense to me. I'm like, that's a really cool idea, right? Now, not everybody agrees with that Hesiodic version. I mention Ovid a lot. Ovid was a Roman writer, but he was a really good Roman writer, and he gives us some of the best versions of Greek myths we have. He says the children of Nyx. He's not alone. I believe it's Aeschylus, I think. I forget which play it. Oh, it's Aeschylus' tragedy to humanities, named after them, where they actually address the fates in that play. And they call them their sisters. And they say literally, we're born of the same mother without a father. So I'm like, okay, there's a pretty clear relation here, right? I had to dig for it a bit. I had to kind of take, even though Hesiod's the guy I always count on, I have to take his 2 weird origins and be like, okay, I don't buy that they're the children of Zeus. They seem older and more important than that. They bind the fate. The gods themselves have to obey that. I don't like that idea. And the Nyx thing is pretty cool because clearly I'm drawing that. But the one that's super duper like awesome is that they're born from the blood, right? So I'm going to put this down for now. I've said this before. It's really important as a storyteller to put your own spin on things. And one of the spins that I put on is combining the two of them. If you take a look in Zeus, the first book in my series, when the Titans slice open Erinyes, the blood hits the ground, and there's a line, and I'm working from memory here, I should have looked this up before, wait, I have it in front of me. I think it's where the blood hit the ground, I wrote an up to it. And the three strange ladies, sometimes known as the Fates, other times as the Furies. I come right out and say it, that you can see them forming out of this primordial blood flow. And so the kind of, even using the word strange there is a little bit of a hint. Like that's a term that you sometimes seen, like strange can mean almost like like fate, right? So I'm combining right there. All right. I'm really double talking my decision here. I wanted to give the Fates the origin they deserved. And I feel like there is a strong connection to be made between these two pairs of trio goddesses. So, like I said, I'm not alone. There's a line when in Hades, when Persephone, I've invoked the scene a couple times, when Persephone meets the Fates in the underworld. And there's that scene where they have their wings when they are moving in like this like serpentine, like reptilian way. They're much creepier. In fact, the pencils for this page, there was even going to be a hint of a snake coming out of one of their hoods, and I took that off because I thought it was too confusing. Because we'd already seen Medusa in the underworld in this one. I'm like, how many people are gonna have snakes in their hair down the underworld? Turns out a lot, right? Hades greets them as the kindly ones. I don't think I've made any secret that Neil Gaiman is a big influence in my work, particularly Sandman was a book that I had pretty much given up reading comics in the 1990s, except for his comic series Sandman and a few others. And Sandman was this epic story of different mythologies. It was about this guy who was he was a member of this endless family called the Endless. They were eternal, and he was the embodiment of dream. And this series had a big culmination. It wasn't the last arc, but it reached its climax, including, in a sense, a little bit of spoilers, the death of Dream, but not in another sense. And it was called The Kindly Ones. And major characters in this arc were this trio of goddesses. And we see this trio of goddess thing not just in Greek in multiple places. So I've already mentioned the Moirae, clearly, 3 goddesses. The Furies, the Erinyes, 3 goddesses. The Graeae, who I mentioned offhand really quickly. The Graeae were the 3 witches who aid Perseus in finding Medusa, also these 3 goddesses. You have it in other cultures too. Like, I'm working on Asgardians now, the series that's followed this. There's the Norns. They're almost identical, the same idea. They measure out the allotments of your life, right? So I think a lot of, in later, you see a few places, a lot of myth retellings will actually say that sometimes the Fates and the Furies, like if you read a book of mythology, were confused. Now, I've done some pretty deep searches looking for actual myths where that happens, and I really can't find any. So I was very troubled by this. I tried to find mythological precedent. The best I found was a few mentions in Pausanias, the traveler who would record stuff. He sometimes is at a place where he's recording something about, say, the Erinyes, and it's clearly the people, it's really the Moirae. So there was a conflation. People would get them confused at some point. Getting off track here. See, this is what happens when I have to justify myself. This is why I'd be a bad lawyer. Let me talk about, so I've made this decision to bring them together, right? I explained part of the reason why, give them a cool origin story. In Hades, when Korra is taken to the underworld, she is told about the very famous idea that if you eat anything in the underworld, you need to stay for a month for each morsel you eat. And she's told that by the Fates who determine the path of your existence, right? The Fates don't live in the underworld. That's the Erinyes do. And this is where I'm getting into that idea of there's a reflection, right? So the Moirae, the Fates, live on Olympus. The Erinyes, the Furies, live in Hades. And there's a lot of kind of like ideas of opposites there. Like, you know, Zeus is the king of Olympus. One of the titles for Hades, who's the king of the underworld, is Zeus Chthonius. It literally means the Zeus underground. So there's this idea of this reflection, right? And so the Moirae appear, and they give her they do give her a choice. She's a goddess, but the goddesses of the abyss, and they warn her. They say, if you eat this, you'll have to stay down here. And then the Moirae, in that the Furies live in the underworld. They help punish the in Tartarus, the different people who are the creative sinners who are being punished there. They lash them with their fiery whips or their snakes or whatever. I lost it again. Okay. So I thought it was really key to have them be there as both aspects, because it's when she is learned. This story, my retelling of Hades, is about Persephone, Cora, seizing her own fate and making her own choice. One of the things that really annoys me about this story is all versions of this story that exist, pretty much of the older ones. She is a character with that agency. It's called the Abduction of Persephone. She's barely even a prop in her own story. It's mainly the story of her mother and her mother's grief. To some degree, you learn about Hades' thoughts on the matter. You never get to hear anything about her, and I felt it was really important we get to feel it, and there was no better characters than this combined Fates and Furies. Now I want to talk about their earlier usage. I established right off the bat with Zeus that I was going this way, and I will be upfront. This is the most controversial decision I have made in my series. I'm very honored that for a great group of people in the world today, and hopefully going forward, that my iterations of these stories are going to be the stories they know best. And it was not easy that I took it on to do this deliberate conflation of who, like I said, for most of antiquity, most of the belief, were two very separate beings. But it's the choice I've made, and here I am talking about it for future generations to see. There was a certain amount, I first used the Moirae, the Fates, in Athena. And there was a lot of reasons I ended up using them there, right? So Athena is the goddess of war and wisdom, most famously. She's also the goddess of weaving. And as weavers, because that's what they are, they measure out everything. They weave the tapestry of your life. I'm like, that's a perfect metaphor. And there was other reasons too, right? I knew I was going to be telling the story of Arachne. Arachne, the mortal weaver, who gets into a competition with Athena where they weave a tapestry. And when she offends Athena, Athena transforms her into a spider. And there's more. And this is kind of like the key thing. I knew this was going to be the story where Zeus swallowed Athena's mother, Metis. And Metis, the reason he did it is she was fated, Metis, to bear a child that overthrew Zeus as king of the gods. And Zeus swallows her. She gives birth inside of his head to Athena, and Athena grows up inside of her father's head. And as a result, this changes her. She understands her father better than anyone else will ever, including Zeus himself. And she doesn't overthrow him. She becomes his most valuable ally. And that triumvirate, it was like fate decreed I should have the Fates featured in this book that way. And that was always such a cool thing. I'm like, wow, I don't know that other people have made these connections so that you should have Athena and the Fates interwoven there. And that idea that Zeus is this one god who has bent fate. That kind of goes into the idea that maybe that explains the idea that Hesiod had, that he was their father. And I'm like, so maybe he didn't mean it literally. Maybe he means, because one of his cult titles was even leader of the Moirae. He's like their boss. But he's not their boss, because we also hear elsewhere that even the gods have to obey it. But Zeus, and this is maybe what makes Zeus unique and special, more so than he can throw lightning bolts, because other gods can do it, more so than any other of his tricks, is that he is the god who bent fate. That he changed fate, which truly makes him the supreme god. I don't know. It's kind of interesting. I'm looking at my loopy notes here. And that also ties into the idea if Zeus is the leader, one of his cult titles, Zeus is the leader of the Moirae. One of Hades' cult titles is Hades is the leader of the Erinyes. Again, that whole reflection idea. So ultimately, because it's clearly some concrete decisions I made, but in order to make it very clear, it would have to be almost a discussion I would have to people. And this is more me monologuing. So I like to kind of throw this out to you if this is an idea that you are comfortable with, like the conflation of these. Are there, I've talked before how I like to, especially in Zeus, I made some very deliberate choices to streamline some elements of Greek mythology. There's Pontos, the original god of the sea, the old man of the sea, who I just kind of leave out of the retellings because I'm like, with Oceanus already, and then like Poseidon, like it just seemed like a step too far. So he could still be there, but he just seemed very redundant. So I don't really mention him. And so combining the two of them is another thing I made that kind of combined the two. But I really like this idea. I'll let you decide. Are they two separate groups of goddesses? Is Hades being accurate when he says, let's call them the Furies in this aspect? Like this is them here. Or are they just linked? Are they maybe siblings? Two sets of three sisters who are linked in this primordial way as daughters of Nyx, right? Who operate almost as reflections of each other. Who there are these goddesses who determine your fate, the path of your life, who have the path of not just your life, the path of all beings' life. And then they are reflections, be them they or their siblings, or maybe not even siblings at all, depending on where you go to, who will seek revenge for when you don't follow that path, when you break from the path you're supposed to go. I don't know. This was a tricky one. I've actually been thinking about doing the different goddesses like this for a while, and I've been putting it off because this is the sort of thing that I spend a lot of time wrestling with and thinking about. And it's interesting. Even though I've made this decision, sometimes a friend of mine was asking me a while ago, he's like, is there anything you would do different in the series if you could do it over again? I thought, and I said, I might not conflate the Furies and the Fates, because it's probably the biggest spin I put on my retellings of these that isn't directly correlated to at least one version of myth where I could really hold it up and be like, yeah, there's this version. The best I could do is like that there's people clearly in the ancient world who made confusion about them, but we have that with a lot of stuff. So, yeah, I think I'm done talking about them for now. I would love to hear your thoughts on it if any of you have questions. I've seen questions popping up here. Let me see. Oh, that's interesting. Addie thinks it wasn't Zeus who bent fate, but rather Athena herself. Addie, that's a good idea. But then, well, you're right, actually, because I guess Athena made the decision not to overthrow her dad, perhaps? I never get the feeling... Well, of course, there is the story where she does help overthrow her dad temporarily with Poseidon and Athena. That figment of that little tiny bit of a story that we don't really know the reason behind. But ultimately, yeah, she doesn't overthrow him. But I feel like my take on it was always that because she understood her dad so well, she couldn't muster. Like I've said this a million times, even if someone's being a total jerk, if you know where they're coming from, if you understand why they're a total jerk, it's hard to be mad at them. This is like why I like Apollo now. I understand why he's a total jerk. So, Zeus didn't mean to bend fate. Zeus did try. He tried just to end it by eating someone. But then fate still had its way of doing it. She was already pregnant. She was still alive, Metis. She gave birth inside of his head. He's kind of lucky what happened. So maybe in a sense it was Athena. And we talked about this the other day, maybe on Wednesday, about like who would be a better leader than Zeus? Because is Zeus really the best leader of the gods? And one of the things we mentioned a lot was Athena might have been a better choice. So I don't know. It is interesting. This is like a very philosophical episode. A lot of talking. I'm like, maybe. So Sparksfly writes, I think they're basically reflections. If they ever meet or touch each other, the world will implode. Oh, it's like matter and antimatter. That's actually kind of a cool idea, right? Like they should never meet. I mean, well, then that is a question too. If they are different beings, right, and the fates control everything, do they control the Furies? And how much do they really control? It's all very weird. They're weird to place in there. And the fact that they have an ensconced place in Olympus, and at least in that one part of Hesiod, I mean, okay, I often make fun of other sources. I'm like, if you're like, if you can't even agree in like the source of one book, what your character's roles are, like this is one story. This is the Theogony, and he changes his mind midway through, like about what their parentage is. I don't know. Maybe Maybe we as modern day readers don't understand. Maybe they had different. Maybe there was two sets of Moirae. I don't know. Understanding is a three-edged sword. Perception is how they are understood. They are, they aren't, and they aren't the same. You know, Predator, I'm going to go, that's kind of how I feel. So, I'm a person who likes to I joke about how I like to make the chronology very accurate in these things. I like to work things out. But there's a certain amount of unknowable. And I like a story. I like a movie. I like when there's a bit of a story that's being told to me that they leave unexplainable. And ultimately, I like to think, to a degree, the true nature and the relationship of these two sets of trio goddesses. Very powerful, strange, existing beyond the Olympian realm of goddesses, that their exact nature is kind of unknowable. And even the way Hades' language is, he's like, let's call them this. It's like even Hades, who knows a lot, isn't really sure of what exactly those beings are. Renka also likes the idea they're an echo of the fates in the underworld. Yeah. A question got cut off. Was Aphrodite mad at the Charites when... Whoop. Since Hades isn't considered Olympian since he lives in the underworld, why is Poseidon since he lives in the ocean? It's a good question, Michelle. Because he also would sometimes live on Olympus. He had, these, like, you know how, like, sometimes people will have, especially rich people, have, like, a couple of homes? Like, he had an underwater palace, but he is often depicted as, in different myths, as being on Olympus. Most of the gods had other residences. Like, Apollo had a residence in Hyperborea. Hephaestus had his forge in Lemnos. Aphrodite was known to have a palace in... I'm forgetting. But there's other places where these gods were thought to reside too. I think in our modern idea, we associate Poseidon so strongly with the sea that we always picture him underwater. But with the Greeks, he kind of would just go back and forth. You'll notice in my books, I kind of draw like there's, it's in a few books where there's like maybe like there's a deep pool of water that like it's the top of it's marble and the bottom is like caves. I figure there's like some weird canal that attaches to the ocean through the middle of Olympus, and somehow because they're gods the water level could be right up that high. They have artificial gravity. Why does Hera stop being married to Zeus one day a year? There's a few reasons for that. So it was definitely, it's a reference to a ritual, like a religious belief. So the idea is Hera as the queen of the gods, as the most powerful of the goddesses, and who is a goddess associated with childbirth and marriage and all these different important roles in a woman's life, especially in ancient Greece. It was important that she be able to like represent all those different portions of that life. So though she is the god of marriage and she spends most of her time married, she would need to take this time off to be the maiden goddess again, to restore her maidenhood, to have a time away from Zeus, so that she could be representative of the full cycle. This actually ties in nicely to something I should have mentioned in my discussion of the true trio goddesses. I mentioned how in Neil Gaiman, they arc the kindly ones. He never comes out and says which ones they are. They are doing spinning stuff, so they're clearly in some way the Moirae, but they take horrible revenge upon Morpheus, the Sandman. And then you see them with like whips made of scorpions, and they take the scary aspect. But he also combines with this idea, which you see in a lot of different mythologies, that they represent the three ages of women. This is not exactly an enlightened view, but the enlightened view is like the young maiden, and then she's like this beautiful young woman. And then there's the mother, who's often this plump matronly figure, who's kind of like middle-aged. And there's the crone, who's an elderly woman. And you sometimes see like the gods depicted that way. Hera never quite hits crone level. And I don't think she ever really becomes a plump matronly figure either, but she does represent the matron and the single maiden. And that's why she has to do that. She takes the bath in the different rivers. It was all over the place, all over Greece. It was different places. Her maidenhood is restored. And then she starts the cycle all over again. Great question. Okay, so this is the rest of it. Was Aphrodite mad at the Charite who married Hephaestus? We're going to have to wait to see on Wednesday. I'm going to save that for Wednesday. We'll talk about that. Because I think that's something that's just a super cool story. That like it's in no less a source than the Iliad. Like, and a lot of people don't know it. Everybody's all like, oh yeah, Hephaestus and Aphrodite are married. I'm like, they're actually divorced by the Iliad. That's pretty wild. So we'll talk about that there. Perhaps Athena doesn't want to face the hard truth about her parents because she doesn't want to be emotional and furious. Okay, that's a super cool idea, right? So the idea, like, I guess this is a question hearkening back to the idea, did Athena bend fate? And we see this in the characterization of Athena. I've shown these books, like, where she feels very, like, there's the moment when she accidentally kills her friend Pallas. It's probably the most emotion we ever see Athena shown in any of these books. And she kind of can't even bring herself to say anything to her dad about it. But you could tell from her reactions before that and during that she's disappointed with Zeus. And it would make a lot of sense for Athena, like, maybe this supremely powerful and capable goddess, the most capable of all the Olympians, the most intelligent of all the Olympians. But maybe there's a chink in her armor. There's a weakness where she still, as many of us do, you look up to your dad, you look up to your parents. And it's hard to discover that your parents are just people too, or in the case of Zeus, just gods too. But the Greek gods are like people. They have huge mistakes in them, in their personality and flaws. So maybe for Athena, it's like the reason she doesn't overthrow her dad is because she wants her dad to be the hero that she wishes he could be. And she kind of works at his side to shore him up and make him be a better god. I like that idea a lot. That's a great idea. Why are the male sons of Kronos the only Olympians depicted barefooted? Now, I thought, okay. So, Kronos, the OG Olympians are, there's the males, and I draw them all barefooted. Hades, Poseidon, and Zeus. Then there's the females, Demeter, Hera, and Hestia. Hestia is depicted barefoot, though you almost never see her feet because she's wreathed in flames. You could kind of see them in the Olympians poster, which I'm looking at right now. I kind of thought I did draw Demeter barefooted. Let me see. Maybe I changed that. Let's see if because if so, then that's not, I did intend to make her barefooted. I maybe gave her shoes because she walks around in the snow for so long. All right, so I know this is really exciting. You might just not see her feet. She's in grass before that. No, she does have sandals. Okay, don't have a good answer for this then. Demeter probably should be barefoot. Maybe she was just trying out a shoe at that time. Hera, I draw with sandals because one of the cult titles for her is silver sandaled, that she wore silver sandals. So I'm like, okay, they're specifically mentioning she wears shoes. She does. Hera is very regal and queen-like. She's a god of higher refinement. So even though she predates shoes, maybe she's more fashion conscious. I mean, if you look, she has the most wardrobe changes of any of the goddesses. Maybe she's just adopted shoes. Demeter, probably make an effort to draw her barefoot in Dionysus now. Hi, how are you doing? I'm doing good, thank you. Do the fates control the destiny of monsters? That's from Eleanor. Yeah, the fates supposedly control the destiny of everything. So, this isn't one. We're getting to the unknowable questions again, though, right? Let's take Medusa, one of my favorite monsters. When Medusa was a priestess and she was born and she was just a normal woman and she had no idea what fate allowed her, were they like measuring it out and they're like, okay, and here she gets to be about 21 and then here she has an affair with Poseidon and then, here's where Athena turns into a horrible snake monster and then she lives for a few more decades and then she gets her head chopped off. Like, did they actually plan all that out? Like, and if so, does that mean the strings that they use to control, are they like puppet masters? Do they use those puppet strings to control Poseidon, to make Poseidon have an affair with Medusa? To make Athena turn Medusa into a monster? It's kind of interesting, right? Like there's a lot of stuff, like thoughts to go into the idea. Because there can be this intrinsically nebulous role about the role they play. This is one of the reasons why I felt, when I use the term strange or weird to describe them, part of it is a linguistic nod to their names, but part of it is the fact that they are strange and weird, and they are so unknowable, and the roles they play are honestly kind of hard sometimes to make match with the other gods. Because if the gods really, if they do control the fates to that degree, the gods are just puppets. They don't do anything. The only gods who matter the Moirae, and by extension, depending how you buy it, the Erinyes. So let's see what else we got here. Would Namor and Poseidon be roommates? It would be very awkward for Namor, the Submariner, to be roommates with Poseidon because, well, first off, he's a Marvel Comics superhero, my favorite character. I've maybe mentioned him before. Namor worships Poseidon. So that would be like if you believed in Jesus, your roommate was Jesus. And, like, what do you do if, like, Jesus doesn't do his dishes? You're like, Jesus, do your dishes, Jesus. And, like, you know, I mean, it just becomes very awkward. So I think Namor would be very hesitant to want to be roommates with the actual god he worships. Oh, wait. We have a Cyprus was indeed where her palace was. Thank you very much, Aphrodite's. We have a translation of what the Erinyes. So I didn't mention that. Those who cause strife. That's one of the roots of their names. It's also mean to believe those who are angry. But the individual names, which I said only appear in the Roman era, though they are Greek roots. Electo means implacable anger. Makes a lot of sense. Megara means the jealous one. Okay, it also makes sense. And Tisiphone means the vengeful destruction. I love it. Okay, wait, this is very... Okay, I should have mentioned this too. The Moirae, my daughter's name is Moira. Yeah, Moira, your name is derived from the Moirae. Your name means, like, fate. So you have a really cool name. My name, George, means farmer. So it's also from Greek. Gay, George, earth. It means I till the earth. My name is less exciting. Your name means fate. I think we're getting pretty close about to the end because it cuts off abruptly. The Fates sound like the three weird sisters, the witches who control the fate of Macbeth and all the other characters. Yes! This is what I'm saying, like the idea that they get conflated in later thing, they totally are. And when you realize that there is, in Macbeth, depending on the version you read, there is a it's a play, a scene with Hecate as the queen of the witches. But Hecate is a straight-up Greek goddess. Some people believe that scene was not actually written by Shakespeare, so I think like in high school when I read it, it wasn't in that version, but I've searched out and read it since then because, you know, Greek mythology. But yeah, maybe they are, right? It's... This trio goddess idea, the way it pops in all these different cultures, it's really fascinating. It's super fascinating. What's my fave, Fate or Fury? I don't think I really formed a favorite because personality-wise, they don't really exhibit a lot of individual personality. I think it's more fun for me to draw one of the Erinyes because I get to draw them being all spooky and they have a lot of personality with the really just two broad grins and such. Oh, ideas for what I could call the god, because I saw a grouping of goddesses. I could also call the gatherings, gaggles, or groupies. Probably won't use groupies, but those are good names. Let's do one last question. In the Hera book, why did you make the ocean on Olympus? Oh, that ties into the idea where I wanted to, because Poseidon does live in the ocean, but also lives in Olympus, I wanted there to be a way that he could connect the two. And through Olympian magic, I figured they could bend space. There's a direct portal in the ocean where he could just like, so he doesn't have to like, because otherwise, okay, I'm Poseidon. I'm like, well, guess I got to go to Olympus. And he has to walk across the land because like Mount Olympus is not really close to the sea. So I wanted to have a way that he could just get there really quickly. I guess he could teleport, but you know, they hadn't invented that word yet. So, okay, I think I just got the countdown that we're down to 2 minutes. So let me just say thank you, everybody, for joining. I forgot my signs today. So when you do your artwork, please send it to georgeoconnorbooks@gmail.com. If you missed an episode, check it out on my YouTube channel, George Olympians. This one will be going up there shortly. And then please join me back here Wednesday where we'll answer the question. Was Hephaestus mad at that? I mean, no, wait. Was Aphrodite mad at Hephaestus? No. Was Aphrodite mad at the Charite who married Hephaestus? We'll find out on Wednesday when we talk about the Charites. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you Wednesday. Bye-bye.